Hello everyone, it is time for our weekly live stream. Maybe I did the intro a little bit better this time, I don't know. But I wanted to just sit down with you guys. I actually have things to talk about that have nothing to do with aquariums. And I figured anyone that's tuning in for the first time will say, why won't he get to the point? So let's just talk about the topic, and then I'll go into my story stuff a little bit later in case that person wants to leave and go live their lives and not listen to what I have to tell you. So today's topic is going to be about cyanobacteria, and I feel like that is an important one that comes up frequently. I think I talk about it about once a year. So odds are the conversation will be kind of repetitive to what I've talked about a year ago, the year before that, and so forth. But at the same time, perhaps I can add some kind of insight, or maybe there's a point you missed in the past. I hope that you guys find this of benefit to your own aquarium, because that's the whole point of this channel, is to help you. Each week I do a live stream at 2:08 p.m. Central Time, which is Texas time. And we talk for about, a topic can run 30, 45 minutes. And then usually I go into the question and answer period where I answer your questions live and try to help you succeed with your reef tank. So cyanobacteria is a type of bacteria. It's not an algae, but it's nicknamed by society as the blue-green algae. And it's funny because it's not usually blue. Sometimes it's green. But more often than not, it's red. It might look deep cyan. It just has a maroon color to it. A lot of times it can blanket the sand, or it can blanket the rocks. It can actually get on top of corals and smother them and kill them. And it's a bacteria. It's not an algae. And so the solution to getting rid of it is to treat the tank with a product. But some people will say, oh, I don't like using chemicals in my tank, when every single thing in your tank has a chemical involved. Everything. Brand new salt water, even if you buy it from someone else or scoop it out of the ocean, is filled with chemicals like calcium, magnesium, all the trace elements. And then you've got, it's filled with chemicals. And then we use chemicals all the time. Look at the people that are treating their tanks or dosing their tanks with sugar, with vinegar, with vodka to combat nitrate. So cyano usually happens in a tank where there's not enough flow. And so it's always recommended to make sure you have plenty of flow in the tank where food is moving around rapidly. So that's your test. Take some flake food and drop in the tank and see where it goes. If it just drizzles to the bottom, your tank is lacking flow. If it's blowing only through one area, but there's a big, huge section that is low flow, try to figure out what you can do to orient your power heads in a different way, or add a new power head in the tank somewhere to create flow in that area where it's lacking. And typically, cyano will take place in areas where it's low flow. So one of the first rules is to make sure you have plenty of flow in the tank. The second thing would be, as people say, don't overfeed your tank, and I just told you throw in flake food as a demo. It's okay. You can do it once. It's not going to destroy your tank. Food is good. Everything needs to eat. So don't feel bad about that. And no, you're not feeding the cyano. They don't benefit from flake food. They're not going to suddenly just like, woohoo, get worse. Now, you can wait it out, and you can wait 3 to 9 months for it to go away on its own. Or you can just treat the problem and solve the problem in less than a week. So it's what I've been recommending forever. I've never once regretted recommending to people to just solve the problem so they can get back to enjoying their tanks. And so that's what I'm wanting you to do. I want you to just go ahead and solve this, enjoy the tank, and move on with your life, and not think about it anymore, rather than being told you can't do this or you have to be more cautious. Now, the number one rule of thumb when it comes to getting rid of cyanobacteria is to remove as much as you can first before you treat the tank. And that would be literally to siphon it out. You become the cleanup crew, and you're going to blow things off, you're going to scoop things out, you're going to siphon. You may scrape something clean that you see that bothers you, like if it's a skin on the glass or on the back wall. You can turn off all the flow in the tank. You can carefully scrape it downward with a scraper so it just falls to the sand like a puddle. And then you can take a tube and just vacuum that right out of the tank and eliminate the mass, eliminate the majority of it. So there's only a little bit left in the tank when you finally treat. And then when you treat, I recommend this product right here, which is Red Cyan Rx from Blue Life USA. I've been using this stuff for over a decade. Before that, I used ChemiClean. If you need ChemiClean and you can't get this one, that's fine. Use ChemiClean. Either of those two products I've been highly recommending for 20 years. And like I said, this will get rid of your problem in the tank immediately. And within 3 days, you will see none. And then next week, you'll be looking at your tank saying, oh, it looks so much better. I'm so glad I did that. Now, what is the risk, or what is the danger? Cyanobacteria medication, as far as I know, is erythromycin. And all it is a way to get rid of this bacteria that is blooming, that is growing in overabundance in the tank. Cyanobacteria actually exists in freshwater, saltwater, brackish water. It's everywhere, and it's deep down in the layers of the earth. It's not weird. It's not some thing that you did. It actually is kind of seasonal, and it can just happen. And, you know, it just is a thing that we deal with just like any other thing that happens in our tank. We just handle it. So in the case of this, we want to go ahead and treat the tank to get rid of it. And what we're doing is getting rid of what we don't like seeing. It doesn't mean you're going to eliminate it completely. It's not something that you've killed off and it can never return because now the tank is cyano-free. That's not the case. What we're doing is getting rid of the red bloom that, or like I said, it could be green. It could even be a hint of blue. And the other thing is when you're looking in your tank, you're trying to identify what you're looking at. The first thing I tell people to do is use some white light. So look in your aquarium. If you were looking at the tank under blue lighting, the cyanobacteria might look black to your eyes. And you're like, well, that's not cyano, it's the wrong color. It's because you're in the wrong spectrum. So let's go ahead and put some white light in there, whether you have a flashlight or you change your LEDs to whites only. And that way you can really see what's happening in the tank, and that way you can identify that this actually is cyanobacteria. And you can type in cyanobacteria into Google, look at Google Images and look at all the pictures of it and compare it to what you're looking in your tank. That'll help you. Now, if your tank is dealing with dinoflagellates, if it's dealing with diatoms, this is not the cure for those things. This is only to get rid of cyanobacteria. I just had to say that because someone's going to say, well, you said, and we want to just solve this one. We're talking about one topic. We're not digressing into other areas because those are different treatment plans. Now, there is a technique that has been recommended a long time ago, and a guy shared it in a build thread on Reef Central, where he said he just turned off the lights for his tank for 3 days and the stuff just went away. And I was like, man, that's amazing. And he showed the picture of the tank before and he showed the picture of the tank after, and it looked night and day. It looked so much cleaner, but his tank was filled with softies. It wasn't a bunch of SPS corals. Myself, I run a mixed reef. I like to have some SPS corals, some LPS corals. I like clams, anemones. I like softies, you know, I like Rickordia, acans, zoanthids, you know, just a little bit of everything. And because of that, I was a little bit more leery about trying this treatment, but I did it. I tried the suggestion where the guy said, just turn off your lights for 3 days. And boy, was I nervous. Now, when I say turn off the lights, I literally mean turn off the lights. Not wrap the tank in a black bag or tape box material all over it to where it is in isolation and gets zero light. We're just talking about turning off the lights that are over the aquarium that are shining down normally, whatever you've got running, 8 to 12 hours a day. Instead, 0 hours a day for 3 days straight. Like I said, you may be nervous. I know I was. And I also cleaned my protein skimmer every single day. So I turned off the lights, I waited a day, and the protein skimmer pulled out some stuff. And I cleaned the cup, and I put it back on the body, and, you know, waited day 2, and the cup had a little bit of stuff in it again. I cleaned the cup, put it back on the body. And on day 3, it was filled. I was like, wow, so much stuff came out of the water. That's really neat. And, you know, I was looking at the tank with a flashlight to kind of see how things were going. And then on day 4, because remember, 3 days of darkness, on day 4, I turned the lights on, and the entire tank was so clean. I mean, even the back wall was clean. It was amazing. It's like brand new glass on 4 walls. And I thought, oh my God, I'm so happy. But I did lose a couple of corals because of no light for 3 days. I had some SPS frags. They were probably 1 inch each. And for some reason, they turned bone white and I lost them. So if you are worried about saving every last thing in your tank, lights out may not be the right choice for you. But if you're willing to take a couple of losses to solve the entire tank, you could try lights out. The other choice is what a lot of people like to say when they say don't use chemicals. They would say increase flow and feed less. But in this day and age where people are starting tanks with, you know, dry sand and dry rock, there's already no nutrients in the system as it is. Their nitrates and phosphates are measuring 0 all the time. They're dealing with diatoms. They're dealing with dinoflagellates. And cyano could actually happen also. And in those situations, feeding less is not the solution because it's causing other issues. We need to keep feeding the right amount. So, and I don't think most of us are overfeeding. Sometimes we overfeed. Sometimes we go a little crazy, or something goes wrong and an auto feeder dumps all the drum into your tank in 1 day when it was meant to do it for the next 30. Or you had a jar of flake food and you bumped it in with your elbow while you're reaching the tank and poured all the flake food in, and it just looks like, you know, New Year's Eve in New York. And yeah, that's an overfeeding situation. But to put in a frozen cube or two, you are not causing problems. So don't sweat that. I don't feel that most of us overfeed. It's possible, but it's kind of unlikely. And you know, if you're a person that feels like they're feeding too much, maybe break it up into 2 or 3 feedings a day in smaller portions. So for example, let's say you like to take a frozen cube and that goes in your tank as your tank is 16 gallons. You could cut the cube in half, let it thaw, and you could put in half at lunchtime, and then you could put the other half in at dinner time. And that way it's still 1 cube a day, but your fish had 2 times during the daytime to eat. But that's just talking about feeding. We're talking about cyanobacteria. Now, if you're going to treat the tank for cyanobacteria, the first thing I said was to remove as much as you possibly could. And then we turn off the protein skimmer, and it has been recommended to add an air stone in the tank hooked up to an air pump that is just blowing out bubbles into the water while you're treating the tank with red Cyan Rx or with ChemiClean. And the reason for this is, as far as I understand it, is that the oxygen level drops in your tank when using this medication. And so we want to increase the air in the water so that the fish will be safe. So don't take a chance and just risk it. You know, I have tons of flow in my tank. I don't actually have to use an air stone. I've never have. And I watch my fish swim around for days acting like nothing has changed. So for me, it's not a thing. But for those of you with smaller tanks, or maybe you have a lot more cyano in your tank because you didn't siphon it out, like I keep telling you, siphon it out. If you are worried or if you're concerned, add an air stone as an extra safety precaution, like a net under a trapeze artist. We just in case he does slip, he can land in that and not die, right? So if you want to have add an air stone, like I said, the package is recommended, go ahead and do it. And then you'll wait 3 days and you look in the tank. And actually, I think most of these packages say wait 2 days. Let me double check. I'm still reading. Sorry, it's a long paragraph. Actually, I think they changed the wording on this package. It's saying, don't dose in the evenings when lighting is turned off. Using this product can lower pH. So using red Cyan Rx in the morning with a buffering agent to maintain pH is recommended. After the desired results are visible, perform a 25% water change. Okay, so rather than giving you a timeline, they are just saying when it looks like it's gone, now you can go ahead and move forward. I usually say wait 3 days. So if you wait 3 days and the cyano is gone, you would do the next step. But if it's not gone, treat the tank again. Put in the same amount you put in on the first day, do it again, and wait 2 more days. So this may be a total of 5 days. It might be 2 treatments. But after that, the cyano should be completely gone from your tank, and now you're going to do a really big water change, which would be a minimum of 25% of that tank. And that can be a hassle if you have a 50-gallon tank and you need to change, 12.5 gallons, right? And you have 5-gallon buckets. It's a little harder because you have, you want all the salinity to be the same in each bucket. If you're buying the salt water from the fish store all at once with multiple jugs, they're all going to match anyway. You can go ahead and do that. But when we change our water, always recommend we measure and verify the salinity is the same as the tank, the temperature is the same as the tank, and the alkalinity/pH is the same as the tank. If those 3 or 4 parameters are exactly the same, you could change 99% of the water in the tank without causing any harm to the livestock. But change a big amount of salt water, and that way you will help control the protein skimmer from overflowing. Now, I forgot a very important thing to say. Let me rewind to where you put the dose in the tank. While the dose is in the tank, you turn off the protein skimmer entirely, and you go ahead and you remove any carbon. We don't want the carbon to absorb this medicine. We want it to stay in the water column. And we don't want to skim it out. We don't want the skimmer on at all. Some people say take off the cup and let it bubble over. That's going to add air to your tank. No, it really is not. I don't believe that's true. I think it might add air bubbles in your sump, and I don't think those bubbles are going to travel up to the tank and add the oxygen. So just put in the actual air stone in your tank. Now, if you're looking at air stones and you're shopping, like at Petco or PetSmart or your fish store, you want a ceramic one, not a wooden stone, because those hang, they're heavy, and they sit down in the tank, and you could, have the tubing go all the way down and let it just, dangle back and forth in the tank and just add air nonstop. And you could have it in front of a power head to where it's blowing the bubbles through the tank. Those bubbles will not hurt your livestock at all. But we don't want to run the skimmer at all while this is in the water column, because we want it to work on the cyanobacteria and get rid of it. Then, when you've seen that you cannot see it anymore, at that point, you would do your big water change, and then you would turn on your protein skimmer, and you'll discover that your protein skimmer is just filling up rapidly. So you need to lower the water level as low as you can in the protein skimmer. If you want, you could even take the protein skimmer and put it on top of a Tupperware container to lift it up higher so that it is even less water in the body. This will help a lot with it not overflowing in the cup. And if the cup continues to fill up rapidly, just dump that liquid into a nearby bucket and replace what's being lost with more salt water. So let's say you did a 25% water change and your protein skimmer pulls out half a gallon. Put another half gallon of salt water to replace what it just pumped out in the last 30 minutes. And you just keep doing this until the protein skimmer settles down. And once the skimmer settles down, you're back in business. Everything's fine. You can go ahead and start running carbon again. But with a tank my size, my protein skimmer will go crazy for a long time. It may dump as much as, well, the last time I did this, I think it dumped about 50 gallons of additional water, which was a lot. So in my situation, I turned off my top-off system entirely, so that way it could not add any more fresh water to the tank, because I didn't want to change the salinity. And instead, I was adding new salt water as it was wasting salt water that looked like watery skimmate. I mean, it looked like nothing. It just looked like water. I was like, why is the skimmer doing this? But to dump it back in your tank over and over doesn't do anything. To leave your skimmer off for another week or two doesn't do anything. We want to get this medication and we want to get the dead bacteria out of the tank, and you let the skimmer just do its thing until it finally settles down. This may take between 1 and 6 hours. And then after that, it's done. It's solved. It's fixed. And you don't have to worry about it until it happens again. I feel that if you have to treat for cyanobacteria once or twice a year, that's not cheating or anything weird. It's just maintenance. And if your tank needs it, so be it. For the last few years, I think I've done it 3 times in 4 years. So, I mean, I don't do it very often. And I usually like to do it when it's just a little bit present. I don't want it to become a full-blown issue in my tank. I see some cyano, it's starting to kind of take hold, and it may be even trying to build up a little bit. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to treat the tank and solve it and get rid of it. And that's why you never see cyano in my tank. That's why my sand always looks nice and clean. So I just want to recommend that to you guys, because this is really the simplest solution is ChemiClean or Red Cyano Rx. Now, I do want to point out, I always keep these in stock in my shop. If you wanted to buy something, you can. Let me stick a little self-promotion on the screen for a little bit. And also, if you weren't aware, there's also a bundle pack. Now, I only have 2 of these in stock right now, but this is Red Cyano Rx and Phosphate Rx. And I always recommend Phosphate Rx to remove your phosphates. So if you wanted to get the bundle pack, you can save a little bit of money that way as well. But these are really good tools to have in your arsenal, and I highly recommend it rather than just putting up with it or trying to wait it out, because it will take forever. And I've had, on numerous occasions, people would say to me, I tried the natural way, I did everything they told me to do, and it wouldn't go away, and finally I just listened to Mark, and I did what he said, and it's gone, and I should have done this 9 months ago, or I should have done this 6 months ago, or I should have done this 3 months ago. And I always feel so bad that they waited, and I get it, you're being cautious, you don't want to hurt your stuff. Totally understand it. If I thought this stuff was some kind of nuclear bomb that was with a ticking timer that was going to nuke your tank, I would say, listen guys, if you want to use this, you can, and here are the 10 things you have to watch out for. But I don't tell you that because there's not that big risk factor. I find this gets rid of the cyanobacteria, and you get back to just having a nice reefing experience, and that's why I recommend it. So the biggest drawback is you have to do a big old water change, and you got to fight the protein skimmer for, I don't know, a few hours. Now, if your protein skimmer keeps overflowing for days, you didn't follow my directions, as I was saying before. So we want to raise the skimmer up as high as we can out of the sump water, if that's where you have it. If it's hanging on the back, you can't lift it any higher, so that's not a solution. You lower the water level in the body of the skimmer as much as you can, and you will just throw away or run a tube from your collection cup straight into a nearby bucket, and you keep track of what you're losing, and you replenish that with more salt water. And if you just stay on top of that for that afternoon, you'll get it back under control. It will not beat you. It's you, a human being with a brain, versus a mechanical device that has a pump on the side. Who's smarter, okay? Do you really think the skimmer is going to beat you? I don't think so. Okay. That was it. See, this wasn't a hard one. And I don't think I forgot anything important. All right, so now, if you want to abandon this live stream and go live your lives, you can. If you want to hear Mark's story for the week, I've got a doozy for you. And I mentioned some of it on Facebook yesterday night for my closer friends. But you guys are my friends here on YouTube, and I need to tell you what's going on in my life. My metal building that's been it's been erected in the back since, I guess, feels like August. And here we are, April. That's 8 months ago. In the meantime, what that metal building, its purpose is to be a studio to where I can go out there and I can work instead of working inside my living room. And that way I can build the acrylic things I do for you. I can pack your orders that you buy from my website. And I can go do that out there and let my home be a home again instead of a business. Because every single room in this house has something to do with my business. I mean, even the lighting I use for these live streams is jammed in the corner of my bedroom. It's terrible. So I would like to get all of my business out there, and I want to just have furniture in here, nicely painted walls, pretty baseboard, and a dog by my side. That's what I want. So hopefully at some point I will get there. And I thought it was going to happen really soon. I was really excited. So back in, let's just say August, concrete was poured. The metal company came out. Maybe it was September. I don't remember the date exactly. I'd have to look it up. But metal building went up. They did it in a day. It looked fantastic. And then fast forward like a month or so, I had a guy come in and spray foam insulation on the walls to make it look, to make it weatherproof. Because with a metal building, at least in Texas, when I was doing my homework, the temperature difference between what's inside the building and outside the building will make the walls sweat, and that moisture will just, wreak havoc inside the building. So I had this closed cell spray foam insulation shot onto all the walls and the ceiling, and it's very thick. It's 2.5 or 2.25 inches thick on all the walls and ceiling. And it's been really neat. Every time I go into the building, it is the weather of whatever was yesterday. It's like a time capsule of weather. It's so neat. If it was cold yesterday and today it's hot, I go in there, it's still cold in the building. It's really neat. And I spent months doing all the lumber on the inside, which is literally just an exoskeleton inside the building to put sheetrock on and to have electrical plugs on the wall. And even today I was thinking, I wonder if I could have done this more simply and just had the outlets on boxes that screw to the wall with conduit pipe, like more industrial look, rather than having it look nice like inside your house. We have sheetrock with outlets in the walls where they belong. So anyway, that was the whole point. It only does one thing: holds up the sheetrock and holds the outlets in the wall so I can plug things in. It's the only thing it has to do. And I spent so much time trying to make sure the lumber was just right. And a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, my friend AJ came to town and spent 2 days with me, and we worked on the rafters going up and did everything we could to make sure it was straight and perfect as we could. It wasn't perfect, but we did the best we could. We worked super hard at it, and in the end, I felt like it's good enough. Could it have been better? I wish it could have been. I'm sure the sheetrockers will be able to handle it and work, with this situation and finish it up. So I had these sheetrockers scheduled to come out this week, and they said that they were going to come out on Wednesday and they could do it in 3 days. And I was thinking, okay, so let me rewind a little bit. The sheetrocker quote, I got quotes from several companies. And, the prices were so high, I was just like, can't stand it. I'd rather do it myself than spend the money, right? But this one company reached out to me and they said, hey, we did come, they were here. They walked inside the building and looked around at everything and then said, we'll send you a quote. And then weeks later, I get a text saying, hey, did you still need that quote? I'm like, yes, I do. And so I got the quote, and it was so high. It was $4,500 to install sheetrock on the walls and, tape, bed, and texture. And I was just thinking, it's a 20 by 20 building. It's like a garage when you think about it, 2-car garage. It cannot be $4,500. And so I went to Home Depot and I looked at what sheetrock cost. And if you buy in bulk, which means an entire I don't know what you call it, but I call it a pallet's worth. It's whatever that stack is before you see the dividers, and there's a next stack and the next stack. If you get a stack or more, it's $9 a sheet. And I did my math, and I figured I needed probably 50 sheets to do this job, including drop and waste. And so I figured, even with tax, they're $10 a sheet, 50 sheets, $500. How can the quote be $4,500 for $500 worth of sheetrock? And so I told him, I said, no, absolutely not. That price is way too high. I would not pay you $4,000 in labor to hang sheetrock and tape bed and texture. And so, I don't know. He said, fine. And then a couple weeks later, he reached out to me again. He says, Mark, we've worked together in the past. We'd really like to, do this for you. What if we did it for $2,400 labor and you buy the supplies? And I thought, okay, yeah. I mean, it's better. It's not great because I'd still be out, $3,000 to $3,500 to do this instead of $4,500 from this one company. Another company gave me a $3,400 quote, and that was before I was even ready, so that price might have changed. Another company had given me a higher quote than that. So, I mean, everyone's prices are really high up. And I just said, you know what? You're going to do it in 3 days flat, and it's going to be ready for me to paint? And they're like, yes. And I thought, I guess it's money well spent. Let me just do it, let them get it done, and I can be in the building by the end of April. I'll be super excited about that. So I went ahead and I did everything I could to make sure the building was ready. I mean, I went through it meticulously. I put all my electrical boxes where I think I want to plug things in. I tried to make sure I could reach a plug no matter where I stood because it's just better to have outlets than not. So all that has been, and all it is just rough work. I mean, it's just a box with wire. There's no electrical connected to the building yet. There's no outlets in the boxes. It's literally just blue boxes nailed to the studs and wire poking out. So whoever does the wiring, whether it's me or someone else, then they would start connecting it, and it would take all day long to do it, I'm sure. But right now it's just rough carpentry. And I did everything I could to have it ready for them. And then they said, we can't come Wednesday, so we're going to come Thursday, and they can do it in 2 days. And I thought, so first it was going to be 3 days, and now it's you can do the whole job in 2 days because you're coming a day later. I'm like, all right, whatever. Just show up. So 2 days. So that Thursday, which was 2 days ago, they came. They met me at Home Depot, and I bought the additional supplies they wanted me to buy. I knew I was going to have to buy sheetrock mud, and I thought I'd probably have to buy some edging and tape of some kind to tape the seams. And I didn't know what else, but they were going to be there. So they ended up loading up a cart and a shopping cart and a flat cart with a bunch of bags of sheetrock mud, which is actually a powder that you add your own water, which I thought was kind of weird. I've always bought mud where it's just ready to go. And so I got that. And then they got 5 boxes of this other stuff that I would have thought was mud, and it's actually texture. So I don't know. And then they wanted me to buy a T-square. And a T-square is this long ruler with a top piece, and you set it on the sheetrock, and you just take your knife and score it to cut the sheetrock. I thought, I'm buying them a T-square? I mean, a T-square is forever. It's not like a one-time use on a job. And I thought it was kind of odd that they wanted me to buy that. And it didn't set off a red flag, but I said, I already own one. And the guy's like, oh, okay, we'll put it back. Now, I don't know what those things cost. It might be $10 or $11. It was nothing, but it was just strange to me that I was buying them a tool that they're going to need for the job. I mean, that's their job. Just like bringing your own drill, bringing your own, pan to put the mud in. Those are your tools. I'm doing the supplies, which would be the mud, the screws, the tape. So I go to the register, and it ended up costing me, another $350 or something for what all they wanted me to get. And the sheetrock itself was delivered by Home Depot for another $79 charge. So all in, I'm about $900 into materials that are here at the house. And I had to buy a couple things. I said, I'll meet you at the house. I've got to buy something. I don't want to hold you up. And I went looking for something in the electrical department. And then when I got back here, they had already taken whatever stuff was in the building that I'd just stored in there, and they threw it in the grass. And I understood I had actually meant to do that myself when we got back. And I didn't tell them that, and they just did it themselves. So they could put down plastic to protect the floor. And then they put together this kind of a makeshift scaffolding. I mean, it's very simple. It's just a rail with some wheels and a board on top. It's not like a full-on giant thing like you see in the movies. It's just a very small portable one. And they hopped up there, and they took a piece of sheetrock, and they put it up on the ceiling, and it looked kind of crooked to me. And I just said, you need to, butt it up against the wall so it's straight. And because they were only speaking Spanish, I mean, the one guy knew a little bit of English, but they wanted to talk Spanish. They didn't want to talk English. They got on the phone and called the boss and complained or described a situation for at least 10 minutes. And then that boss called me up because he wasn't here on the job site. And he said, so they're saying that they want you to make the ceiling level. And I was like, I know it's level. I know for a fact, as I used to laser level to make sure it was exactly straight across. I said, maybe they wanted to be parallel or they wanted to be symmetrical. I did the best I could. It was very hard to do inside a building with spray foam because there's no straight edges. And then the guy, I hung up, because the conversation was done. He tried to relay a little bit of all of whatever he must have said. And I know some Spanish, but I didn't understand everything he said because I wasn't trying to understand it. I knew he was telling his boss, and this guy would do the mediator thing. So when I went to the guy, I said, what do you want? And so he tried to explain it, and him and his buddy, they put a chalk line on the ceiling, and they pulled it super tight, and they pulled tight, and it snapped a red line across all of the ceiling joists, or ceiling rafters, whatever you want to call them. I said, okay. And he said, so go put one on this side. And he goes, we can't because of the way the wood is. You need to just go from here to that point. And the thing is, he would tell me, make it like this one, this one triangle. And I was like, that sounds so easy. That is not how you can do it in this building because you're working inside the constraints of a building with a roof already in place. And so in theory, to say just make it like that one sounds great, but it can't be done. So originally the flat area of the roof was supposed to be 48 inches wide, which is the width of a piece of sheetrock. And that was my goal. I really tried. And we did everything we could to get it. But what was happening was it was 48 in the back of the building. But as you came toward the front of the building, it was more like 52 or 54. It just got wider. But in a way, I didn't really think that was going to be that big a deal because I felt like when you're doing it, however you do your work, you'll kind of cheat it. And I figured if you ran the sheetrock sideways, you can go 48, then you can go 50, and then you can go 52, and then you can go 54, and it'll all work out. And it'll kind of be this optical illusion, but it's going off into the distance, so it doesn't even matter. And, who cares about a couple of inches? But they were adamant that this had to be the exact same width. And so I went up there with my tape measure from their chalk line and went across. I said, well, that's 59.5 inches. And he says, that's fine. I said, so you want 59.5 inches all the way? And he goes, yes. So they literally took their scaffolding apart and left. They just said, we'll be back tomorrow. And I was just like, wow. And I was so mad. I was really mad. I mean, plus I slept barely 5 hours, so I wasn't in a great mood. My neck and back was hurting. And them doing this, like showing up, try to put one sheet on the ceiling, and then suddenly announce it's all wrong, and I got to tear it out and do it again, and then they're leaving. It just made me really, really mad. I mean, I literally came back inside and crawled back into bed and said, let me get some sleep because I'm just so angry right now. And I needed to finish my nightly sleep because I normally don't get up early in the morning. I get up around 10:30, 11. I joke I like to get up at the crack of noon because that has been my schedule forever. I'm very nocturnal. But I got up and took some pills and I had some coffee. And finally I was feeling sort of normal. And I said, all right, let me go out there and just deal with the ceiling. And I basically had to undo each series of rafters all the way from the back to the front to where everything was exactly the width they wanted. And I went and bought a neon pink line. So that way, here's their chalk line. I ran another line so I would not miss this mark. And I went systematically through the building. It took me all afternoon by myself to fix it. And then, I cleaned up all my stuff and it was ready for them for the next day, which was Friday. Friday morning, they showed up at 8 o'clock. They got up in there and they said, okay. And I was kind of expecting a little bit more like, wow, you did a good job. This looks great. No, didn't get any of that, but whatever. I mean, who cares? It just would have been nice to hear that I did it right after them complaining so much about what I did wrong the first time. But I I was watching them work, and there was just certain little things that I was just like, I'm thinking I'm hiring professionals that do this for a living. They're going to knock it out because they do this every single day. I mean, they just hang sheetrock. This is what they do. And I'm watching it, and I'm looking at what little bits of tools they're bringing in with them. And I'm thinking, it's like, are they professionals? But I'm trying not to nitpick, and I'm definitely trying to keep my expectations of perfection in check. And because, I know I could be super, like, hey, that has to be exactly right, which is very frustrating to do. You can't have people micromanaging you. If you want to micromanage yourself, you can do that all day long. But when you've got people working for you, you just tell them what you need done. And if they can get close to it, that should be okay. And they were working across, they got the full length of the building done. And good. And then they start working down the first side, and they had to cut around a couple of things, and they got that side done. And I was like, all right, And there was even a thing they did around this one metal gusset-looking thing. And I was like, man, that was really smart the way you did that. I never would have thought of that. I would have had this big, huge hole, but instead you cut it in a way to where it's just a little piece. So I'm like, that was great. And then they started working the other side. They hung the sheet, and it was kind of crooked, and it was running long. And by long, when you install sheetrock on walls or on ceilings, you go stud to stud to stud to stud. You stop on a stud. You always stop on a stud. No matter where the stud is, that's where you stop. And if you have to, you cut like one spot, and then from that spot forward, it should work out mathematically, and it's going to be every 8 feet, and it works out. But what they did was they ran the sheet long to where the end of the sheetrock was just floating between two rafters. And I was thinking, what are they doing? I watched him take a 2x4, and he put it on top of the sheetrock, and he put some screws. And then what he was planning to do was to put the next sheetrock next to it and scab the two together. And scabbing is what you do when you're patching. You don't do that on new construction. And you definitely don't want to do that on a ceiling, because ceilings are notorious for sagging anyway. Gravity's pulling all the time. And I saw this scab, and I thought, why are you doing this? And he just was like, yeah, and it's fine. And I'm looking at him thinking, no, this isn't fine. So I took one picture. I called their boss up, and I sent him a picture. And I said, listen, I'm concerned about this right here. And it's not just one spot. They're doing it on the next spot as well. They're just like running it wild, and just wherever it lands, and just put a 2x4 on top. And I said, that's not how you do this. And he says, okay, I'll talk to him. I'm like, no, don't get them mad. They already walked away the first day. And he says, no, it's fine. Don't worry. They're not going to get upset. If you see a problem, we take care of it. We want, if you are, wanting a certain way, that's why you've hired us, and we want to make sure we're taking care of you. It's like, okay. And then there were some other things that happened. Like, they didn't have this tool that cuts the holes out around the electrical box. A lot of people have them. It's, like a roto-zip or something like that. You can just hold in your hand, go, and it just cuts out the perfect hole. And they didn't have that. They were just using, I think it's called a stab saw, and just poke it into the wall, and you saw by hand. And they were sawing around the electrical boxes that were for the lights on the ceiling, and it was really jagged and bad. And I said to the guy, how come you don't have one of those cutters? And he said, oh, I have one, but I don't have the charger. I don't know if it was stolen or if it was lost. But he had the motor, but he didn't have a way to charge the battery. And he said, it's in the truck. And he said, it's DeWalt. I said, well, I have DeWalt tools. Maybe I have the right charger. And so I went and got the charger, and he sent a guy off to fetch the tool from the truck. And I tried to put his battery on the charger, and mine looked like his. I mean, it was literally the same thing, but it would not charge. It just sat there doing nothing. And I messed with it a few times. But my battery worked on his tool, and his tool was cutting. So I said, you know what? You can use my charger and my 2 batteries, and that way you can get the job done more cleanly. And he's like, okay, thank you. And I'm watching them cutting or scoring the sheetrock, and their knives are just like whatever blade is in the thing. It just seemed old and ancient. So I brought them an entire thing of brand new blades, so they have sharp blades to work with. I just kept giving them things that I felt they needed to get the job done. And so anyway, after talking with that guy, the boss, and him telling me everything was fine and they're working on it. I talked to my friend Dwayne, who does sheetrock work, as you know, and I showed him the picture of that scab. He goes, "You got to be kidding me. That is a terrible, terrible thing." He says that is going to crack. That is guaranteed not to work out. You need to tell them to change, no, take that out and redo it, or cut it at the stud and then start a new sheet from there. And I was like, you're right. I mean, it's ridiculous because they're just moving forward, and that's just going to be a thing I have to deal with after they're long gone and got paid. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go out there and talk to them, even though I feel like I'm going to be a thorn on their side. And I walk out into the building, and there's no one there. And I'm looking around, and the scaffolding's gone again, and their ladder is gone again. And there's bits of sheetrock all over my lawn, pieces from their cuts. And there was some of my tools, and there was my charger with one battery, and there was my T-square against the wall. And I'm like, I look at my watch. It's like 11:30, 11:45. It wasn't even noon yet. And I thought, I'd almost think they went to lunch, except they took their scaffold. So I called the boss and said, "Are these guys coming back?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, they're probably just grabbing lunch." I said, "With their scaffolding?" And he says, "I'll call you back." 20 minutes later, he calls me, and he says that they are not coming back and that we have a problem and that they say it's too hard and they quit. And I'm just like, they walked off the job without even knocking on my door or telling me anything. They literally just took their stuff, took their toys, and left. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was shocked. It was bad, okay? The work was not up to par, obviously. And there was a few little, like I said, they don't have the right power for their rotozip. They don't have fresh blades. They didn't own a T-square. I mean, just all these things came together. Plus, I'm looking at the ceiling, and it's so bad that I'm just thinking, I don't think I want them to come back, So the guy from the business, he told me, I'm going to show you guys a picture of this one spot because I haven't shown you yet. Let's see. Can I just share my phone? Let's see. I wish that was bigger. Going sideways make it better? Not really, but anyway, you can see how that was just scabbed together with a 2x4 and a bunch of screws. And there's another one at the other end of the sheet, down there is the other 2x4. And then the next picture, this is another spot that they were scabbing together. You can see where, I don't know if my pointer is on the screen, but you can see screws in a line, and you can see the joint butted together. And there's nothing there. There may be a piece of 2x4 put here, but I don't see anything down here. This is again scabbed. This should have been a piece that went from here to the screws. And instead they just filled. And so then their excuse was they didn't want to waste they didn't want to waste sheetrock. And I said, I bought 50 sheets for a reason. And then, like I said, they complained about these metal gussets, like they were in their way, and it was just much too hard. Now, I'm paying them $2,400 labor alone to just hang sheetrock, tape, bed, and texture. And I didn't think that was underpaid. That's a lot of money. Normally, and back in the days before COVID, when you get a job, typically the price is materials doubled. So if materials are $1,000, labor is $1,000. And in this case, materials is $1,000 and labor is $2,400. And they said it was too hard and left twice after showing up a day late. I was stunned. So anyway, I posted about this on Facebook, and I'm on the fence. I mean, the boss I spoke with, the guy at the company, he said, I can send a different guy out. He can take a look and see where they left it. He's slower. He works alone. It's the same price. And I was just thinking, I don't think I want you back. I don't think I want anything to do with this. This is very disappointing. And so I wrote him after a couple of hours. I sent him a text and I said, you know what? This is such a bad experience. And literally they walked off without even saying a word. They just drove away and left everything undone and left me halfway in a job. I've never had anyone walk off on a job in my life. It's craziness. And I can't imagine anyone doing some work and not saying, let me just keep doing it so I can get paid. I mean, That's how work works. And this was just stunning to me. So I wrote him back, said, you know what? Don't send the other guy. I'm not paying $1 for what they did. I've got to undo some of what they did. The little bit that they did get right, I'm going to leave it up. I mean, I'm not going to pay them for abandoning me. And they took my battery, and the guy said he'd buy me a new one to replace it. And I said, you know what? Lesson learned. I'm out a battery at this point. I'm not out any money because I didn't pay them anything for the labor yet. And I'll just have to do the job myself, or I'll have to find someone else that wants to do the job. I don't know what yet. But in the meantime, I spent my evening last night hauling all the sheets of sheetrock out of my driveway. There was like 39, 40 sheets out there. I had to bring them one at a time to the building, put them inside to protect them from the weather because we have rain coming again. And then I went and got the big boxes of texture and hauled all those into the building. And I picked up all the mess they left over the lawn and put that in the building. So everything's buttoned up. Fortunately for me, my building has no real deadline. It's just something I want to use. I want to be able to work in there, and I want to be able to clean up my house and make it look nice. But I can continue as I have been for all these years, just the way it is right now, and take care of my customers. Which this week, a few of them, they got neglected because I was dealing with all this mess, and I was dealing with trying to prepare it to make sure it was right, and burning an entire day working on the ceiling again for the second time because they weren't happy the first time when I could have been working on orders. And I was really aggravated that I was having to put some delay, but I had to do this so they could do their job. And then they walked off their job. I mean, it was crazy. And it's probably good that they left when they did, since what they were doing was bad. Who knows how much worse it would have got as they got more further down the walls. But very disappointing. It made it a really hard week for me because here I was looking forward to painting walls next week, and instead that's not even on the horizon. So all right, so that's my story for the week. Do I have anything else to tell you? I don't think so. Everything else is just, I mean, you know, I did ship out plenty of orders this week, and I've got a few people that will be going out Monday and Tuesday, and that will take care of them. So I mean, there's not some monster backlog or anything horrible. It just was a really big bummer because I was looking forward to, here we go, I might actually be in this building by the end of April. That's super exciting. And now that's shattered. That dream is gone. So, all right. Dave asks, where's the crown on the rocks? Not yet. I'm starting my day a little slower. I'm a little sore from yesterday. So for now, it's just going to be some coffee. Happy Easter to all of you, by the way. I know that's tomorrow, and I know many of you celebrate it. If you haven't done it yet, go to the store and buy yourself some chocolate eggs so you can enjoy them in the morning. And I'm not making fun. I love chocolate eggs. EJ says, how important is salinity to coral? Let's say, hypothetically speaking, my salinity is 1.020, but I dosed alkaline calcium magnesium to spec. Will my coral behave differently from 1.026? Yeah, 1.020 is too low for coral. Think about this. A lot of fish stores, they sell fish in their fish-only system, tend to keep their salinity at 1.019. So you're one crumb up from that. I mean, you didn't say what corals you have. You know, you didn't say if it's just a bunch of leathers and, you know, soft corals, and maybe it won't be as critical. But I really do usually just encourage people, just keep your reef at 1.026. And you can put in whatever coral you like, and it'll work out. So I would raise it up gradually for the next week or two and bring it up. Why are you shooting for 1.020? I guess is my question. What's the benefit? Is it just so you can acclimate fish more quickly because they're at 1.019 at the fish store? Because it just takes 45 minutes or so to get fish from 1.019 to 1.026, and then they're ready to go into your quarantine tank or into safety stop. Yeah. Hamada says, fun fact, did you know cyanobacteria is 3.5 billion years old? Now you do. Yeah, no, it's been around forever. I've found these articles. I come across them from time to time. And I remember reading one, I think it was about a year ago, and it talked about how they had, some people had dug down crazy deep into the Earth's core and found an entire pocket of cyanobacteria. I was like, ha! It's everywhere. Cameron says, I would say most fish owners overfeed. Well, I definitely overfeed. You guys know that. I had nitrate and I had phosphate out the wazoo, and I make sure my fish are fat and sassy. So I do. But I also have a lot of filtration in place. And I just think if you're overfeeding, but your nitrates and phosphates are measuring 0, you're not overfeeding. That's my point. But if you have a tank that's 3.0 phosphate, if your nitrates are 200, yeah, you're overfeeding. But a lot of times people have cyanobacteria in a tank that really has no notable or traceable nutrient levels. And that's where I feel like they're not even feeding enough. I think they're so scared. They're like, I only feed 1 cube every 3 days. I'm like, why? How many times did you eat today? You know? How can you go with 1 bite in your tank every 3 days? These poor fish, they need to be fed. And then Cameron also says here, frozen fish needs to be defrosted first. Yeah, of course. So that's what I was saying. You take a cube and you cut it in half, and you can thaw 2 halves, and you can have one that you can put in the tank now, and the other half can be in the fridge waiting, and it'll be nice and soft and ready to go. You can put that in the tank later. Now this I disagree with. He says they aren't fed in the wild every day. I feed mine every other day. So you see, here's an example of someone that feeds their tank a little less frequently. I disagree with that. And I feel that in nature, fish are feeding all the time. They're constantly foraging for food, looking for the next bite to eat because they never know if it's their last. And they're constantly looking. Now you've got your herbivore fish, like tangs, and they're literally swarming over any kind of rock or outcropping, looking for things to bite on, and they swim to the next one. And that's all they do all day long. And other fish are doing the same thing. Yes, they're eating as much as they can at any opportunity. And in the ocean, there's a risk of getting eaten by something while they're looking for food. So there's also the prey versus predator situation as well as finding food. But no, I definitely feel, I mean, I must eat 10 times a day myself. I still mainly feed my fish once a day. Every single night I feed all the fish. But I try to remember to put in something during the daytime, or I like to put in a half a sheet of nori on the tank once every, I don't know, I seem to do it once every few days. I wish I could step that up. I tend to forget. Bradley says, just a FYI, never try and take the drum out of the Neptune auto feeder over the tank. You know, if you're going to work with an auto feeder at all, I agree. Take it off the tank and do what you're going to do. You can also test the product like to the side of the tank, or if you have an overflow box with a lid, you can put on top of that. You could put a paper plate under it, and that way when you're working and testing, you could see exactly how much is coming out before it actually hits the water column. And that can be very convenient. I used to do that when I was testing my Eheim auto feeders. I wanted to verify what was coming out, and so I would hit the feed button, or I would just set it up and let it run because it's battery powered, and I would just come look and see how much came out that day, because it ran 2-3 times a day and put in 1 rotation. I was like, well, how much is that? And it was just a little bit. I was like, okay. And then I could adjust the door to be a little wider to let a little bit more food go in because I was feeding many fish. Hi, Kevin. Yep, Spock's right there. I just saw her right there. Wrong hand. It's always backwards. Hey, Sid, thank you very much for the super chat. I really appreciate that. Born to be a shooter Josh says, what kind of snails would eat hair algae off the rocks? I have Nerite, Nacerius, and dwarf cerots Floridaceras and they just want to clean the glass or the sand, or climb out of the tank. Yeah, Nitrates do climb out of tanks. Urchins are really good for eating hair algae off of rocks. The large Mexican turbo snails will eat algae. A sea hare will eat hair algae. These are some of the creatures that'll work. Hermit crabs will help cut it off the rock, and they will eat some of it if you watch closely. So that is another option. It could be blue-legged hermits, red-legged hermits. Those are some that work. Astrias and trochus snails are good snails that consume algae off of rocks. But if you have an abundance, you're going to need to rip out as much as you can by hand so that they are getting what's left. Again, it's just like the cyanobacteria at the beginning of this video. You remove as much as you can by siphoning it out or scooping it out. And that way, when you treat the tank, you're just treating the last of it. And if you rip out all the hair algae you can, and when I say rip it out, I don't mean take a rock and brush it. I mean literally reach in your hand, pinch the algae, pull it off out of the water, put it in a bowl of water, rinse your fingers, and put it in and pinch again. And that way you don't release it back into the tank where it can land somewhere else and take hold and grow somewhere else. We want to remove it entirely from the tank. And you just do that until you can't stand it, and you just stop. And you obviously can't do the whole tank in one day because it's just so overwhelming. Just work on a section, and then tomorrow do a little bit more. Spend 20 minutes a day on it each day for a few days. And then what's left, your snails and hermit crabs will get rid of, and you'll get down to a nice pristine tank. Behind me, I have a whole tank full of rock, and there's no algae on it. I mean, there was a little bit of cyano happening behind this maize coral, and there was some happening there under that pajama cardinal. And I took a turkey baster and blew it, and the skin just kind of blew off, and that was the end of that. It wasn't like a thing that was taking hold that was going to be an issue at all, which was nice. It took care of itself. Drug Monkey RX, you must work in a pharmacy, said you should have flown in your friend. Trust me. I wanted to, but he said 50 sheets. No way. I'm like, yeah, I get it. Calypso says next time pay the $4,500, or you avoided the headache. Well, actually, it was the same company that did this. They were originally going to charge me $4,500. They were going to buy the materials. And it would have been even more money for them to just walk off the job and complain. So, it's crazy. I mean, if the job was really, okay, let's do it this way. They said they could do it in 3 days. And they wanted $2,400 for the labor. That's $800 a day, right? Decent money. I'd like to make $800 a day. And then they said we can do it in 2 days, even though we're coming a day late. So now it's $1,200 a day they're going to make. And that wasn't enough money? I don't understand. So. One King Claude says, in fact, the price was average, in my opinion. Good luck. So, yeah. Justin says, I just set up my Emerald 34 sump. How can I calculate what flow rate is through the sump? Well, what I would recommend, you didn't say what the size of the tank itself, but usually I suggest that the flow rate be 3 to 5 times the size of your display tank. So if you had a 100-gallon tank on top, I would say that you're going to want 300 to 500 gallons an hour going through the pipes that go back up to the tank. And that may seem low. You might say, well, I want 1,000 gallons an hour, which is 10 times the flow rate of the display tank. And you can. Don't go too quick. And if you buy a DC variable pump, you can adjust down the flow to where it looks and sounds right, which is a nice option compared to the old days where we bought a mag pump and you put it in the sump and you hooked up your plumbing and you plugged it in and that was it. Whatever you bought, you're going to live with it. And we made it work. But nowadays, you can actually just fine-tune those pumps and you can say that's not enough flow or that's too much flow. Now, there was a period where people would buy like a humongous pump, like a pool pump, and put it on the side of their sump. And they said, I'm going to use this giant pump. It's going to move so much water so fast, I won't need any power heads. And what they would end up doing is they'd have to get a really big sump. They'd have to put in a bunch of filter socks and a ton of baffles. So the water had to navigate through all these baffles and socks and everything and sponges and anything they could to stop the microbubbles that would ensue from doing this too quickly. We just want the water to come drain down into the sump quietly. We want the filtration, whatever you got in place, to have the adequate contact time before the water pushes back up into the tank again. And I don't consider the return pump a source of flow. Like it's not the desired, well, let me correct myself here. I don't recommend it as your main point of flow. In my tank, it's a little different because I'm actually using the RFGs, the random flow generators, and I am using them as a specific way to create flow in my tank from my return pump. But in the past, with all the previous aquariums that I did run, it was just a way to get water back up. And as long as water got up and water drained down, it was perfect. And then I had my Vortec pumps, or I had Maxi Jets, or I had Gyres, or whatever I used, Tunsies. These are all the different pumps I used over the years to create the flow in the display tank itself. But water drained down 300, 500 gallons an hour and flowed up quietly, and you didn't hear anything, and it was nice. So that's kind of the best way to answer your question, is you're going to have to figure out what size your tank is, get a ballpark number to shoot for, and then keep in mind, just because you have a 1,000 gallon an hour pump doesn't mean you're going to get 1,000 gallons an hour coming out the pipe and back into the display tank, because the diameter of the pipe itself is going to limit how much water can go through that tube. And every single fitting, from the union to the elbow to the 45 to the lock line connection to a bulkhead, to a fan type thing on the end of your lock line, all that, every single one of those things restricts your flow more and more and more. You're amazed how little flow you actually have going through the pipe, even though you have a pump that says 1,000 gallons an hour on it. And that's just something that people have discovered, especially people that own the Apex, that have the flow meters that will tell them how much flow is going through the pipe, and the number's much less than what they think the pump is rated for. So that's just something to keep in mind. Anton says, that's a nice tank, I'll tell you that. Thank you very much, I appreciate it. JPK Esquire says, nitrates recently spiked from 10 to 20 to 30. Of course, right before a new shipment of SPS corals. Rapid reduction of nitrates or bring it down slowly? If you wanted to do a 50% water change, you would literally cut those nitrates in half. So if they're 30 right now, they'll be 15 after a single water change. Andy says, how old is your pajama cardinal fish? That's a beast. They're 10 years old. I've had them forever. They're ginormous, I agree. And there's 4 of them in the tank right now. So, look, we're all caught up. We did it. And we only talked for an hour. That's great. Today is water test Saturday. I definitely want you to test your water, because water tests save lives. And we do this on purpose because we want to make sure that all our parameters are in check. We want to make sure our alkalinity is stable as it always is. I usually recommend somewhere around 9. If you have a tank that's running low nutrients, very low phosphate, very low nitrate, you may want it to be 8 DKH. Calcium should be between 375 and 450. So maybe yours is always 425. Good, just make sure it stays there. Phosphates, we want them to be very low, but not 0. The original or official goal is always 0.03, which seems very low. I'd say anything under 0.1 is really pretty good. I wouldn't sweat that. Phosphate is not a number I worry about in my tanks. So 0.1 or lower is good. Anything above it, might consider doing something like Phosphate Rx to bring it down. Or if you're a person that runs GFO, you can use that. Magnesium should be around 1,300. I like to run mine at 1,400 because Montipora appreciate it. My container is actually empty. So I need to refill it today with new solution. So same thing for you. If you are dosing 3-part alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium, you want to make sure that your containers are filled up and have the adequate amount for the dosing for the next month, I guess I could say. If you manually dose your system, then just make sure you have some on hand so you don't run out. And we want to make sure our temperature is stable. You know, whatever that number is. If your tank runs 76 at night and 78 during the daytime, just it's always that all the time is what we want it to be. We just don't want it to be 74 this morning because there was this weird cold front, and and it got it was really cold at night, and then during the daytime it's up to 89, and your tank is getting to 84 degrees. That's too big a swing in one day. We want it to be very close together. So just have a slight variance, maybe 1.5 degrees variance from morning to night to morning to night would be better than to have a bigger swing of temperature. If you haven't gotten in the habit of testing potassium, I do recommend you get a test kit. Salifert makes one that apparently is pretty easy. I still haven't ordered mine because I own a couple other Fauna Marin potassium test kits, and because I haven't bought the Salifert yet, but I will because I want to try it myself, and that way I can report to you if it's any good or not. And potassium should be 400 or higher. So if your tank is less than that, we want to bump it up. I did send off an ICP test last week, actually a little bit longer. I sent off a vial from the Reef tank as well as a vial from the Frag tank, and I got a phone call from them saying that the second vial was for RO water. I'm like, no, it's my Frag tank. I literally crossed that out and wrote Frag tank on there. And they said, you got to pay an extra $10. I'm like, okay. So I paid $10, and I still haven't got my report on my Reef tank yet. It's kind of annoying. But I know the Frag tank, and it's low in quite a few trace elements, but the other numbers were all in check. So it just needs a couple of decent water changes, and that should get that one back on track a little bit better than what it is right now. And then nitrates, if you're anywhere under 20, you're doing fine. 10 would be really good for most corals. If you're running an SPS Reef, you may want it to be lower, like around 3 or 4 ppm. And we talked about salinity already today. 1.026 is what I recommend. So that is it for today. I think I'm going to see if there's any more questions, but I'm kind of ready to wrap it up. I want to, I don't know, go deal with that, or maybe take care of some customer stuff that I need to do because I don't want to burn the day. This week's been bad enough, right? Let's see. Luke says, I'll answer some questions. Luke says, is it normal for SPS frags to lose color or brown out when you get it? It can happen. It can be that you put a coral in your tank that's really pretty and then it turns brown, and it means that your water parameters are just not what the coral came from in the first place. Especially if you're buying something high-end, something that's just really stunning, it can change if you're not running stunning water parameters yourself. If you're normally in the past, if we saw corals turn brown, it's because our nutrients are too high in the tank. But just because it turned brown doesn't mean it's going to stay brown. It can regain its color after a few weeks. That's why I do mention that when things go wrong in our tank, it could take up to 12 weeks for it to look right again. And so if you've got certain corals in your tank where there's chalices or it's SPS corals, you may have a period where they don't look so great, but then they start to really get their color back when you get everything back in check where it belongs. So I wouldn't give up on it. I know in the past we've bought brown corals on purpose because we knew they turned into something amazing once they went in our cool looking tank, where we had our tank in perfect ship shape. And I'd be in a fish store and I'd be looking at all the frags and like, that one right there, I think that's got a lot of potential. And I would bring that home, and I did. I bought one at Aquashella, and I put it in the middle under that, my head's in the way, under that green Slimer. And it was just this little thing that I was like, man, that thing's going to turn into something. And I put it in there, and it's already changed colors, and it's grown to double its size. It's still nothing, but eventually it'll be something amazing. And I just had a feeling about it. Justin says, lowering a phosphate with Phosphate Rx, what exactly is lowered and how is it removed from the tank dosing the liquid? So Phosphate Rx is lanthanum chloride. It's just mixed up to the right amount, so you don't have to actually do any math other than count drops. And you use 6 drops per 10 gallons, and you can export with a 10 micron filter sock, which is a specific sock. Most socks are 200. So you buy a 10 micron sock, which I have them in stock. And you can also use a protein skimmer. For about 9 years, I just relied on my protein skimmer to export the flocculant. And what that means is that the liquid hit the tank, it turned the phosphate into a solid, which if you looked at it under a microscope, it would look like little flakes. And then those flakes were captured in the protein skimmer and collected in the collection cup. And if you clean your protein skimmer before you treat with Phosphate Rx, and then look at the collection cup the next day, the next morning, because I like to dose it late at night. If you look the next day, you'll notice there's a lot of white inside your collection cup, and that's the phosphate that turned into a solid and it was exported. But like I said, you can use a 10 or even a 5 micron sock if you want to capture the flocculent and get it out of the system. How it works, like I said, it changes into a solid, and how quickly it works, it's within hours. It's amazing. Now, I don't use it at full strength, but I have when I needed to. I tend to use less than the recommended amount on the box in my tank, and I just watch my phosphates that are here come down to here literally overnight, and it's reliable. I've been using this stuff for over a decade. I highly recommend it. I'm not sure what you're asking me here. He said, I'll check my water change. It needs to be done after I do my changes on the weekend, but it would be better to test days before the water change or after at the same time. I'm not sure what you're asking me. I'm sorry. Can you clarify that for me, please? If you're just saying, when should you test your water, that's up to you. Sometimes it's good to test your water before the water change to know where things are, but then you also should test your new water to make sure that they match. But I feel like there was a conversation we had before and I already forgot what we talked about, so I apologize. Reef Keeper says, Salifert is pretty easy and good for potassium, in my opinion. I've been using it for a while. See, that's what I keep hearing. I just need to go ahead and add to cart. I just haven't done it yet. Estonian Reefer says, does Spock frag your SPS corals unintentionally? No, she's pretty good about not breaking stuff. She swims around them. Obviously, I cleared out a lot of stuff with Dwayne last year and gave her a lot more swimming space, which is good. But she can pretty much thread a needle as needed. It's pretty good. And then Reef with me says, my phosphates are dropped from 0.10 to 0.03 since switching from Reeferoids to Benereef. Should I worry about bottoming out? Should I reap the results of hard work? What's your take? No, that's great. Everything's working the way it should. And the Benereef will definitely do a good job for you, and it doesn't add phosphate or nitrate, which is really, really nice. So you can totally do that. It won't bottom out. It should not from that because it's not a, it's still a food. It still adds something, but it's not adding a lot of waste to your water. MMA Radio says, what sump do I need for a 75-gallon? I would like a refugium. I like to put in something as big as the tank. I mean, in ideal conditions with a lot of space, if you could put a 75-gallon underneath your 75-gallon, that'd be fantastic. And that way you knew it could hold every drop of water. But usually you don't have that kind of room. A 75-gallon aquarium is 4 feet long. So if you had a sump that's about 40 inches long, it should fit in the stand. And it would have room for a protein skimmer. It would have room for a refugium. It would have room for the return zone for your return pump. And you could dose into it. You could use reactors to run carbon and so forth. I mean, that would be it. And on my website, I recommend the Model F sump as a really good layout. So if you wanted to mimic that or if you want to order a sump from me, you could. Ekbar says, my PO4 level is too high. It's near 0.15. I tried everything. Water change every 2 weeks, 30%, and still the phosphate is high. What is your recommendation? Well, I'd use Phosphate Rx again to lower it. That would be me. But water changes could dilute it, but not really effectively because the phosphate's in the water, it's in the sand, it's in the rock. So it's kind of everywhere. And so if you wanted, I can't believe I'm saying this, but if you want to run a reactor with some granular ferric oxide, the GFO, you can do that, and you're going to have water trickle through it very slowly. I mean, it's like less than 80 gallons an hour. It's very slow flow. The media would be in the reactor, and you only put in the right amount. Do not just like fill a reactor to the top of GFO because you'll strip the tank of all the phosphate and cause all kinds of problems. So if you read the instructions and it said something like, use a half a cup per 50 gallons, and your tank's a 50-gallon tank, you put half a cup of GFO in a big tall reactor. That's okay. And then you turn on the flow and it's very, very slow and the media barely wiggles. I mean, it just barely is like rumbling on the surface. It should not be tumbling or anything like that. We don't want any of those GFO fines, the actual shards of metal, to get out into the system and get into the gills of your fish. So I myself don't use GFO. I didn't like it. I tried it for 9 months back in 2004, and I hated dealing with it. I hated the whole ordeal. It didn't work for me, and I got my hands on lanthanum, basically. I used something called Phosbuster Pro, and then I went from that to phosphate control, and then I went to Phosphate Rx, and I've been using it ever since. It's the only thing I use to control my phosphates, and it works. So, but if you don't want to use that product or you can't get it, then GFO in a reactor using the right amount would be the best way to control your phosphate. And what you can do is you can measure the water going in. I mean, you know what the phosphate is of your tank. So you want to measure the water coming out of the reactor. And if it's coming out less than the water going in, it's doing its job. If it's coming out at the same strength, so if it's 0.15 going in and it's 0.15 coming out, you need to slow the flow even more, because you want the phosphate to bind with the ferric oxide and stay in there. And it should be coming out, I mean, I'm not going to say it should come out 0, but it should come out lower. It should be coming out like 0.05. And if it's doing that, then as time goes on, as the system's turning over through the reactor, and every drop of water is being processed through the GFO, you'll get lower phosphates. And this stuff wears out, and you have to replace it. So every month or every couple of months, you got to deal with opening the reactor, cleaning it out, putting a new GFO, rinsing it really well, hooking it up, being very careful not to release those fines into the system, like I said, because those can sting your fish on the gills. We don't want to do that. For me, it's too much trouble, so I just don't do it. Daniel says, how old is your whitetail coal tang? I can't remember. I remember when I saw it, it was an ad from Sea Dwelling Creatures posted on Facebook, and I tagged Frank's Tanks, the fish store by me, and I said, I want this fish. And he replied, done. And I was like, wait, how much does it cost? And he says, you'll get it tomorrow. I was like, oh my God, what did I just say, you know? And so I kept saying, how much is it? And he kept saying, don't worry. And I was like, oh my God. And I don't even remember what I paid. It wasn't something horrible like $800. I mean, it might have been $125 or something. I don't remember. But I was like such an impulse buy. I was like, add to cart, you know? And he just said, done, it's ordered. You come to the store tomorrow and pick it up. I'm like, wow. And I've had it ever since. I've probably had it 5-6 years, but I don't remember exactly when I got it. Luke says, what parameters do you recommend for an SPS tank started with frags? It doesn't matter. Frags or colonies, it's still the same SPS parameters. The actual list of parameters I recommend are they're built into the Reef Trace app if you haven't checked it out. By the way, Reef Trace came out with a humongous update. The entire app looks and feels completely different. If you own it, update to the latest. If you don't own it, you should buy it because it's really nice. The notes section is incredible. Adding parameters has never been easier. The graphing is incredible. I plan to do a little video showing like a tour or a tutorial of what you can do with it now, because it's changed so much from when it started 3 years ago. So I think you'll really, really like the new and improved one. And the recommended reef parameters are in there. But just to answer you specifically, Luke, since you asked and we're here, you need to pick a number in your alkalinity, somewhere between 8 and 11, and stay there. So if you're like 8.25, you stay 8.25 day in and day out. That's it. If you were to test every single day, it should always be 8.25. That is your goal, to keep that alkalinity locked in. Calcium, always at 400. Magnesium, always at 1400. You know, that kind of thing. Salinity, 1.026. Phosphates, 0.03. Nitrate, 3. You know, if you can do all those numbers and keep them there rock solid, your SPS corals will do really well, as long as there's adequate flow and there is good lighting being provided. And those frags will turn into colonies. Heart on Reefer says, where do you recommend getting Gargonians from? You could do Live Aquaria. That's a good brand. That company's been shipping corals and fish for a long time. You could try your fish store. You could try your local club. Everyone has stuff to share or sell. I got my piece that's in the back corner there. You can kind of see it moving in the flow. It's a brown Gargonian. I've had it for 6 or 7 years, and I grew it from little nubbins, to something about this tall, and I have cut off branches off of that, given some away to people, and sold some pieces, and it just keeps growing. And it's one that isn't demanding. There are red ones that are photosynthetic. I'm sorry, the brown one is photosynthetic. There are non-photosynthetic Gargonians that have to be fed to keep alive. So do your homework on which Gargonian you're wanting to buy. There's probably 4 or 5 different kinds out there. Like, for example, one out there that everyone loves and no one keeps alive long term that I'm aware of is called the blueberry Gargonian. It is gorgeous, but it needs so much food, and it's really designed for a non-photosynthetic tank, an NPS tank that literally has green water all the time because there's so much phytoplankton in the system. And if you had all these specialty corals with that blueberry Gargonian, they'd probably all do really, really well, but you got to feed the heck out of it, and the feeding will cost you a fortune, but you'll have this stunning coral reef that no one has because it's so unique. It's so different from the stuff that we tend to buy. And I've been to places where some people have set up tanks specifically to do this, and one guy, I was visiting him when I was traveling, and he had phytoplankton hooked up on top of his tank that dripped in all day, every single day. And every day he filled up another 2-liter bottle or something, maybe even larger, and that would be dripped into the tank all day long, and the water always had a green tinge to it. Then there was this guy on Facebook last year, and he had some of the most amazing corals, and we're like, oh my God, I love your tank. Well, he was a part-time employee at the fish store, and he was able to ask for anything he wanted under the sun, and just was a matter of when they came in, and he added to his tank, and he ran only white lights. And his tank was gorgeous. And I kept saying, this needs to be featured. I think he lives in Las Vegas. And I was trying to remember his name the other day because I wanted to see how things are going, if he's still running that tank. But I remember he was buying a lot of Reef nutrition bottles to keep all those corals well fed. And it was something to be envied. You know, I was very jealous of him. I was like, man, I just want all of that. And I really enjoyed all his pictures because of the white lighting, you could see everything perfectly. It was really, really nice. Reef Keeper says, have you ever had an Achilles tang? I have one in quarantine right now. I added one a few months back, and it did great for 2 months, and then passed away for unknown reasons. Any tips if you kept one? I haven't kept one, unfortunately. I never found one to buy. And I don't know if I can even get one these days. Sorry, Jack is barking incessantly. Let me mute myself for a second. I'm going to go close that door. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. She's still barking, so I just closed the door. So no, I don't. Achilles tangs, they're semi-aggressive. It's typically a good fish to add at the end. Maybe yours did fine for 2 months and suddenly died because of the way it was captured. Unfortunately, there are still fish being captured with cyanide, and we can't tell that they have internal organ damage when we buy them. They look normal, they're eating, they're swimming, and poof, they're just gone. And usually when that happens, we tend to think it must have been the poisoning, you know. So I can't tell you for sure, but that does line up with being illegally captured, you know, the wrong way. It's unfortunate that's still going on. It's been a thing for so long that this should be outlawed. And yet, apparently it's still happening, and I'm just so shocked. Because you would think we're just like, okay, can't do it. Don't do it. It's so simple. Just use a net. Because a lot of fish are captured with the nets. And unfortunately, they're not captive breeding them yet. If they were captive breeding Achilles tangs, we could just get healthy, safe fish that eat and no aquariums from the moment they're born. and that would be much more ideal. So I don't really have any specific tips to help you with. I'm sorry. I have a friend who's had an Achilles tank for a very long time, and it's one of his favorite fish in his tank. And he's kind of proud of himself that he was able to do it because it is a challenging fish to keep. Alex says, do you think some additives such as Seachem fuel might increase chance of cyano? Yes, dosing amino acids can lead to cyanobacteria. But like I said, it's also seasonal. It already exists. It's blooming. It's actually becoming visible. It already was in your tank anyway. It's just once we see it, we care. But while it's invisible, we don't care at all. Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying. So if you're just wanting to check your tank, I always recommend testing your water every Saturday. I've been saying that forever. If you test your tank weekly, and ideally if you test at the same time, you can compare numbers more accurately. For example, let's say I was measuring my water parameters right this minute. It is 3:35 in the afternoon, and I look at the pH of my tank, and it measures, 7.9. And then I test again on, next Saturday, but I test at 8 o'clock at night, and my pH is 8.1. I might say, wow, my pH is much better this week, when really the pH is better at the end of the day than it is in the earlier part of the day. So if you're trying to track parameters regularly, you want to test at the same time every single time as well. Think of this as well. When you, if you test at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're measuring alkalinity or calcium, magnesium, these kind of elements, but your doser comes on at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then you measure at 8 o'clock at night, you might get a higher number and think I need to dose less because you just measured after a doser went off. So find the time that you think works for you, that window. Like if it's Saturday mornings for you, you do it every Saturday morning, perfect. Just stick to that because that way at least you have a consistency of the time of day you're testing. And when you look at all your numbers, if you're saving them in Reef Trace, like I was recommending, or if you're putting them in a spreadsheet, or you're writing them in an actual journal to look at, you can then know it's always Saturday mornings, and these are what my numbers tend to be week after week after week. And that's it. If you said your tank's only 3 months old, so you're still getting used to this, but I definitely highly recommend testing every single week and not being sporadic. There's some really bad habits out there that many of us have developed where we're like, everything looks fine, I'll do it later, or I'll do it tomorrow, which ends up being 3 weeks from now, or even 6 months. And test kits actually are made to be used within 1 year of opening them, and we have to use them up. So just because the test kit still has half a bottle doesn't mean you can still use it 5 years later. It's going to give you inaccurate answers. Justin, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. He asks, do you have any experience with a CO2 scrubber? My pH is way too low. It's around 7.6. I believe it's from excess CO2 in my home. I just don't know about how often I'd be able to go through, or how quick the stuff will go through the media. Yeah, how quick it'll be used up. I haven't used it myself yet. I bought some to put on in the shop. It's not even on the website. But you can like filter the air going into your protein skimmer and help to buffer up your pH some and to stop the CO2 from getting into your system. I've been noticing Reef Dudes has quite a few videos on this, so I'm going to actually point you to a totally different channel because he's actually done it. He has not only has he done the CO2 scrubber, he's also recently done some kind of CO2 meter that you can connect to your Apex and actually see the numbers live all the time. Now, I know you can actually buy a device and just stick it on the counter and turn it on. It'll just tell you the CO2 reading anytime you look at it, just like looking at a clock. And that might be worth looking at as well. I'm not the kind of guy that opens doors and windows. I like to trap my air and breathe the same air forever. And it's a bad habit, but I like to control my temperature in my home. And here in Texas, in the winter, it's icy cold. In the summer, it's blazing hot. So I really only have like 3 weeks out of the year where the weather is what I call California weather, where it's just pleasant in 70s, where you could bring in some fresh air. I don't do it very much. So I can't bring in fresh air to help my tank. Now, my pH of my tank is measuring higher than yours. So I guess the question is, how are you measuring it? Are you using a pH probe? Are you using a pH pen that you push a button and put it in the water? Are you using a test kit where you have to shake, a titration style? Because they all give you different numbers. I would love it if you wanted to spend, I looked it up, by the way, recently. They're about $100 now. They used to be $80. The American Pinpoint pH meter has a probe that has a long wire, and then you hold this thing in your hand that's about the size of your cell phone, but much thicker, has a 9-volt battery in there. And you can just put it in the water and you can measure the pH anytime, day or night. And I love that tool because you can measure your water in your reef, then you can go and you can measure your frag tank, and then you can go measure your newly mixed salt water. And it's the same probe going place to place. So, I mean, if you get 8.3 here and you get 6.5 in your new salt water, like, whoa, the pH is way off. I can't do this water change yet. You wouldn't know that if you didn't have that pH meter. So it's a really good tool to own, and I would recommend having that to know what your pH actually is. And of course, these probes have to be calibrated. So you have to buy calibration solution and calibrate between 7 and 10. There's a 7 solution, there's a 10 solution. And you do these, every 3 to 6 months to verify that the probe is accurate. Now, I relied on that American Pinpoint pH meter for so long. I built myself a little acrylic bracket, and I made it to where it fit on the side of my sump, and I set the meter on there, and I put the probe in the sump, and I just turned it on and left it on. And every time I opened the cabinet doors, I saw the pH, and I closed the doors. And that was it. It was my way of knowing. And then later, I bought the Apex controller, which measures pH anyway, and I can open my phone and see the pH anytime I want. And even those probes, they wear out, they have to be replaced, they have to be calibrated at least annually, if not more frequently, probably twice a year. And so that's how I'm able to keep up with what's going on with my numbers. But if your tank literally is like 7.6 to 7.8 each day, that's pretty low, and you'd want to raise it up. Maybe if your alkalinity or your calcium and your magnesium were in a better spot, the pH would come up accordingly. But you would have to look at those parameters to see. Everything has, all those things work together. And so if your alkaline, your calcium, magnesium, your salinity are right, your pH tends to stay relatively where it needs to be, unless you have a situation like a room full of dogs breathing. They're going to definitely use up the oxygen, put a lot of CO2 into the area where the aquarium is, and that's bad. If you had a party and everyone came in to enjoy your reef tank and they're all breathing, they're going to lower the pH of your tank because you got 10 or 15 people all standing around the aquarium. That's a real thing. So once they leave, your pH will probably come up some. Andy says, what's your opinion on the API test kits? I only use 2 of them. I use the one for ammonia for emergencies, and I use nitrate because it measured 0 to 200. And I like that was a simple test that gives me my answers, doesn't cost a lot, and does the job. I'm not looking at it for pinpoint accuracy. I definitely want to know, do I have ammonia happening? Do I have nitrate? And when I was using other tests like Salifert or I was using Elos, my nitrates were so high I couldn't use definitely with Elos I couldn't. Elos measures 0 to 25. And then the Hanna Ultra Low Checker came out, and I think that one went to like 25. I was like, wow, I literally can't use that. Then the Hanna High Range Checker came out, and I was kind of in the market to buy one, but I kept reading posts from people saying you can't get the reagent. I'm like, well, then what's the point? So I've just been using API for nitrate. It's just been, the test kit I use. But now that my numbers are lower, they're like under 20 week after week after week, I can go ahead and use like Salifert and get a nice measurement from that and find out what the numbers are. But you were saying, what do I think of API? I'm fine with those. I'm not big on API pH or API calcium or API phosphate or API magnesium. I have no opinion. I don't know that they're accurate or good. I don't know. Gary says, do you think Dr. Tim's products are really needed or useful, or is it snake oil? There's a few products like Waste Away I hear people talk about all the time, and they seem to be having good results with it. I don't think I've used any of Dr. Tim's stuff ever. I don't hear negatives about it. So no, I'm not going to say it's snake oil because I don't have any reason to believe that. I feel like if it was, I would have heard about it from the people the circles I'm in. I'd have some kind of a clue like, oh, watch out for this one. But I don't think it's a problem And if you feel the need to use it, I think you'd be okay. And I think there's enough people using it, you can talk to others to get some advice on how to use it or what to avoid or what to be aware of. But for myself, I have no answers because I've never used it. Yeah, Reef Keeper says, kind of what I figured, cyanide caught. Shaking my head. Can't stand what divers still do that. Who knows if that's really the case, but suspect. Yeah, you see, we don't know. And the only test that came out to find out if a fish died of cyanide poisoning that I've been told was to put the fish in a blender, turn it into a liquid fish, and then measure that to get a reading. And that is a terrible way. I mean, think about that. You're trying to find out if your family member has COVID and they have to put you through a blender. It makes no sense. It's too bad there's not something you can do. And there was this one study that happened where I think, I can't remember the details, but all I can remember specifically was this one group that swore they had a test for it. Every other scientist out there tried to mimic those exact conditions and could not. They could not achieve it. And so the system that was being promoted apparently is faulty and not repeatable. And if you can't repeat it, if you can't rely on it, if it's not an accurate test, then what good is it? And this, like I said, this one, like I don't remember all the details of the study, but I do remember it was very promising. I was like, oh my God, they finally came out with a way. Can you imagine that? You buy a fish from the fish store, you drop in a purple pill, the water turns blue. By the time you get home, if the water's still blue, you know your fish doesn't have cyanide. I mean, that would be a wonderful system. And I'm just totally making this up out of my butt. Okay, that's not a real thing. But whatever they did, I guess the idea was this is going to be such a good test that Fish and Wildlife can use it from now on, and anything being imported can be verified that it's not been captured illegally, it's not been captured with cyanide, and it's good to go. It can come into the U.S. And I think that was the premise. And imagine that, if you came up with some kind of a magic pill that could help identify this stuff, I think you could kind of get rich off of it. Because all the hobbyists would want to buy it, and then of course the government would buy it for testing as things are coming into the country. And so that'd be great. But like I said, when anyone else tried to do the exact same test as this one group said worked with one type of clownfish, they couldn't make it happen. It wouldn't work for them. And there was this whole back and forth, and it did not survive peer review. It didn't work, and we've not heard anything about it since. It's unfortunate. But it'd be great if one day, what would be great is if the divers would stop using it. And so here's what I was thinking last year, because I'm so naive. I was thinking, well, stop buying from divers that use it. Like, for example, if I'm a fishery and I sell fish to America and I have 15 divers that go out and bring me fish, if I find out that diver 13 has been using cyanide, I will just no longer employ him, okay? I will use all the other divers, but 13, he's gone, he's out. And now I know all my fish are coming in, are not being caught with cyanide, and I will sell them to the United States, and I will continue to have good business relations, and I'm gonna make a lot of money. That's the way I thought it would work. But then I was told by some people that are in the know that there are fisheries that give the cyanide to the divers and say, go get the fish. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe that's a thing. It makes me so sad because they're encouraging it rather than discouraging it. And so then it's like, well, then how do we know which fisheries are doing it? Let's stop buying fish that come from that fishery. So instead of diver 13 being the bad guy, we're going to go to the middleman and get rid of that one. Like, we no longer get fish that come through XYZ imports. We only get them from ABC imports because we know theirs are cyanide free. Why can't people just be honest? That's all I want. Oh, it's so difficult. Justin, I got plenty of 10 micron socks, but I'll order another case just because of you. And then Will Marr says, Waste Away is awesome. That's the Dr. Tim's product I was mentioning. He says, I've used it many times. See, there you go. I don't know if it's the same as like Live Rock Enhance. You know, I mean, I know Waste Away is a liquid, Live Rock Enhance is a powder. I wonder if those two things are kind of equal and just, you know, a different type of method of doing the same thing. I really don't know, but I do know Live Rock Enhance definitely works really well in the tank. I keep that in stock. I buy 50 jars at a time for you guys. And you can just put it in your tank 2 times a week, and your rock will just get cleaner and cleaner looking. Your sand will be clean. It just helps to, it puts in waste-consuming bacteria, which I think is the same as Waste Away. So they may be the equivalent. Just one's liquid form, one's a powdered form. All right, guys. I think we'll just wrap up there. Thank you so much for tuning in and enjoying the live stream with me today and answering my questions and listening to my big sob story about sheetrockers. I hope that you have a great weekend. You enjoy your holiday tomorrow if you're celebrating. And if you haven't done it yet, on HBO Max, they are showing Dune, and I watched the end of it today. I finally finished it. I was falling asleep last night watching because I was so tired after moving all the sheetrock. But I finished it. It was a really good movie. And it's part 1, so there's a part 2. So if you want to check it out, you can tell me what you thought of the movie if you haven't seen it.